What's up, everyone? Cannabis Congregation, thanks for joining us for Sunday's episode of Cannabis Legalization News. Today, we're joined by Cody out of Washington. He's a longtime cannabis entrepreneur and activist. We're going to chat with him about his experience in Washington as a cannabis entrepreneur. So let's just get right into it. Hey, Mickey, Tom, and Cody. How y'all doing?
Good. Thanks for joining us, Cody.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It's fun.
Yeah, I met Cody last year.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So we connected then, and he has lots of knowledge in the industry. So how long have you been involved in the legal cannabis industry?
Well, 2011, I opened up my medical shop. So 9 years, although I'd been kind of involved with it a little bit before that. So 10 years is what I say.
Sweet. So when you opened up your medical shop, how were the rules back then? Did you have to be on both sides of the aisle? Did you have to be in retail and in production?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was basically whatever, anything goes. Everybody who was opening shops back then was opening under a very strict interpretation of the law, which I think when I originally did it, they were doing the provider model, Now,
the provider model, you see, because a lot of our audience is in Illinois and then in other states where they're still just catching up to medical. So the provider model has kind of gone by the wayside. Explain that a little bit.
Well, so it's the same in California, where so you had a medical cannabis patient, and they needed to secure their product, but maybe they're not growing, or they're sick, or they've never done it before, they don't know how, and so they would go find somebody who knew how to grow, or would be able to otherwise provide their medicine, and they'd give you their paperwork, and then that paperwork allowed you to carry cannabis for them, so you would be able to provide it directly. And then, so that was the original rules. So I had opened, did our incorporation in January of 11, and then we were open by May 4. And in that time, there was a legislative process that went on. So the state had actually put together a whole big package of oversight and regulation that had passed both
both chambers of your legislature.
Both chambers, correct. And then the governor went and vetoed, did sectional vetoes of all the stuff that would have given a structure to the law. So basically,
so this, because you're describing certainly, and this is also because we'd explain the evolution of the laws as well on the show, and so there's variations of the medical marijuana and also legalization. It almost sounds like a grow and give model that you see in Vermont and in DC, where it's fairly legal, but there is no commerce in it. So it doesn't really see you didn't mention dispensary, you didn't mention we packaging requirements for the eighths and all that stuff. It just was more along the lines of you have a caretaker, that caretaker is allowed to cultivate and cure and then distribute the medicine to the patient. Yeah All right. So and then they started getting regulations in 12 or 11, and then what happened with those regulations in the Washington market?
Well, it wasn't even, what was it? It was we didn't get regulations until the law actually passed. Right. So so 2011, end of the year, 502 passed through the legislation. But in between there, it was this weird, super gray area where, so those original rules went by the wayside, and then we were operating under this one little section that was the collective garden model, right? That allowed you to have up to 10 patients at one time. And then that was how you could still run a brick and mortar dispensary, because then you can only have 10 people in at once, and then you had to check them out. This whole rigmarole, and then once we started getting regulations, then it still didn't affect the medical shops because they weren't included in legalization. They were kind of tacitly
Were they making sales? Did they have dispensaries?
Oh, yeah.
They'd be like,
oh yeah,
wow.
What killed medical was 5052, SB 5052. Because they gone for all the regulation around the ambiguous words with medical. They're no, we addressed the medical concerns, but instead they really killed medical at the end. Is that what made you pull, Chuck? Or pull out the business? Because you pulled out when it became kind of in the White Center area where you were at, the first one.
Yeah. Well, moving out of there, that was also a product of regulation because my existing location didn't meet the buffers. So I was too close to the Catholic school there. So we had to move anyway. And it was a very competitive real estate market back then, being able to find stuff that did conform to the rules. And like, Lord knows I spent most of my time just like pouring over maps and like buffers and all this stuff, trying to find something that did work. And we ended up down there more or less because it was what I could find. It was actually that, or that initial spot that I'd secured on 4th Avenue that was still available, right?
But like, because I always try to tell Tom about how, like, in the early days of Washington and our medical scene, and even in California, kind of like how the medical market gives everybody a potential to create that nest egg, right? Like, would you credit your ability to just grow a couple plants and then sell it through that medical model to help you develop that collateral that you eventually, because now you're doing other stuff, you're doing construction, you're doing, you know, you're into like the legit shit, but still, you know, being a cannabis grower, you know?
Well, you know, like, so we did some growing, you know, but a lot of it was really just working with growers that I knew and people I'd known for years and years, long before I opened a shop, and just kind of making that work. You know, beyond that, I mean, what else is there to say?
Sounds like
when you talk about equity or whatever, you know, my real triumph with all of the legalization was actually knowing how to fill out government paperwork and,
right.
like, and filing taxes and things like that. You know, I remember when I had first opened my store, my lawyer, I asked him, I said, so what do I do? Pay the sales tax? You know, like, he's like, well, kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, you know? And I was like, well, all right, I guess I'll be right with God and the government and pay, you know? And that was eventually, you know, when they laid out 5052, that was one of the requirements that they had to be able to do that, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious that you didn't have requirements regarding payment of taxes until you had full adult use legalization. You know, that's just so bizarre from our rubric over in Illinois, where it's like, you know, it's very military. It's like, no, the medical will basically be adult use, but it'll be extremely restrictive. And then we'll wait for some producers to be able to go. And then after 5 years, we'll change the law. We'll grandfather them in, then we'll open it up for everybody. It's just so strange to hear like the origin story of cannabis legalization from the medical perspective, where there really wasn't any particular industry. And then they brought industry in and they just killed everybody. You know?
Yeah, well, so one of the big things that we did was we formed a trade organization, because remember I told you, so that law got sectionally vetoed, right? And so then the city came to some of us and asked us to do some self-regulation, you know, because there wasn't any, they didn't have anything that they could work with. And so, you know, me and about, I don't know, a dozen other shop owners, growers got together and we formed the Coalition for Cannabis Standards and Ethics. We did that. It's kind of a self-regulatory thing, you know. We put together, some rules, you know, in terms of,
you know, if the pharmaceutical industry can regulate itself, I don't see why the cannabis industry can't regulate itself. You know,
that killed the cannabis industry in Washington, right? Because I remember people coming. I don't know if you guys know. So I have this issue with activists and influencers, right? Kind of sometimes in the same thing, and then at times it's way two different things, because you do need an influencer thing to put out products. But there was a YouTuber, Custom Grow 420. I don't know if you remember Cody. This guy, he took the camera down in the markets, and he's just like, you know, we're out here having fun. And then he took that same video during the hearings for SB 52 and said, look, this isn't medical. These guys are having a good time. It was just a total perspective on what should be medical, what shouldn't be. But let alone, you know, it is medicine for the most part. You know, there was a good community at the time. Not so much now, though, huh, man?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of true believers in the medical field. But of course, like, you know, they didn't do marketing, right? So you didn't see their side of stuff for the most part. What you saw was like the medical that was really essentially recreational. You know, the guys doing the foot-long dabs and all that stuff, and just like people, you know, the farmers markets, you know, which were pretty interesting.
Oh, I enjoyed it.
But that's ridiculous that you guys, through legislative lack of oversight and lack of leadership at your executive at the state level, allowed this municipalities to kind of go their own way, and that created a power vacuum that resulted in worse policy. And then you have 502 come in and essentially upend all that stuff, because for the ones that do say it's medical, well, they can grow their own or still access the systems that may or may not be in place. I mean, but that would then raise the question of Okay, how many of these traditional not home growers, the medical growers that were licensed are still standing?
Very much.
Well, so none of them were licensed, right? Like
Oh.
in the medical field, like in the medical times. In Washington, there were no licenses, right? All there was this like weird, like, hey, if you've got paperwork that says there's a patient that needs grass, like you can grow it for them or you can sell it to them, or people used to do the donations,
Yeah, the grow and give.
Yeah.
And then they like, my paperwork's in order. Well, I'm here from the state police. We don't care. Did that ever come up? Because there were raids back in the day.
Oh yeah, no. I had a shop that was a half block away from me in White Center raided.
But you're like, Dan, that's why I paid my taxes.
Yeah, well, it wasn't even that, right? It had nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah.
He ran it, didn't pay his federal taxes, and bought like a Mercedes for cash, and that just tripped off the IRS, and then they looked into him and they're like, oh, you haven't paid taxes in 5 years, and like, oh, we're doing all this other stuff, so we better look into it. And he had 4 locations, and they were just making bank, dude. So
what have you learned then? What's if you can encapsulate your 10 years of knowledge navigating the industry, at least on the West Coast, what's some of the most valuable lessons you learned?
Oh man, there's a lot of them, I'll tell you that. I mean, for me, it's been an exercise in learning just the corporate law, figuring
corporate
out.
Law is huge.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, when you started it with the grow and give model and like the patient caregiver model, you don't need to worry about a capital raise and what the heck mezzanine financing is. No. But when you start to do a vertically integrated, like TrueLeaf, this was a title out of a headline out of this week, where TrueLeaf, I guess, is 50% of the cannabis sales in Florida. One company is 50% of the cannabis market in Florida. That's capital raising, like on steroids. And so you're going to see a lot of corporate governance then.
Yeah. I mean, they start adding all these layers, and then you end up with companies run by guys who have nothing to do with the industry. Like you look at High Times, right? They've gone through like these 3 CEOs from like totally different industries, like not even really marketing, or like events. It's like, what does High Times do? It's like they do events and they do like their publication, but then they just hire these corporate guys who have CEO experience. They come in and like
load it up with debt, take the money, declare bankruptcy, buy out the debt.
Yeah.
As we like to call it in Donald Trump's America, business.
Yeah, right.
Cody, when you started then in the Weiss, because that was your first store, right?
Yeah.
So did you just like, I'm gonna rent a space and then you get a local business, the city license, and that was it? That was your start?
That was it.
And then
no security?
No, man.
No seed to sale?
No, nothing. It was all it was is my wife's friend got a job at some shop. Actually, it's Clear Choice, I think, Dawn's place. Miggy, if you remember. Yeah. So Ada got a job there, and then she called up my wife and was like, "Hey, you want to work there?" And then when my wife told me, I was like, "Oh my god, if she can do it, then I can."
Well, and that's what I'm saying. The threshold, it was low overhead for like most people who could just.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, I opened that place for $20,000.
Oh man. When I'm making my advice to the guys for dispensaries, I'm like, all right, well, let's start at $500,000, but you should really budget for $1 million.
Well, you're in Illinois, man.
Yeah.
Like, just like it's as bad as California. You can't just have a few bucks. You got to be able to get up. You got to have connections. It's like there's so much money in capital just in California, in Chicago. Really.
Right. And then that was something that came out just yesterday. I didn't even think I was going to have to do this. And then yesterday I had to do like this whole page about tied applications, because last week the state of Illinois actually created a whole new article to their law that legalized it. And so they have this whole new article about what happens when there's ties. So like, I'll talk about all these lawsuits that happen in competitive states where they compete for these licenses to quote unquote win them. And then there's all these lawsuits. And so instead, it looks like what they're doing is they're setting it up so they're going to compete, and there's going to be all these ties. And then after there's ties, it's random.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then, like, how can you sue them? It's like, well, you tied. Oh, you almost won that. You did the best you could. You had the greatest application, but you rolled a 6 instead of a 3.
Yeah. You made the biggest sin in America. You were unlucky.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Better
what
be
I like.
lucky than good. That should be one of the mandatory provisions in it. Yeah.
But see, I think that's why you have Tom has issues understanding like the West Coast markets as far as like the infrastructure. Because over in Chicago, Illinois, I think it's very impressive that they created the medical market. There was this infrastructure of, okay, we're going to establish you as a medical person. Because in Washington, there was like over 1,000 dispensaries. The unlawfulness is what hurt them, and then when SB 52 came about, it was because the guys who were already in the rec market were saying, well, they don't pay taxes. That's unfair. And so now we're here. Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, it was inevitable,
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as the state got its hooks in it, it was just all over, and I mean, it's funny, but it's really like the government that ruins everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they came in and they want to regulate it, make it safer, but all they really did was push out all the small guys and make it so that you had to have $500,000 to start.
Yeah.
And maybe that's for the best because a lot of those other guys are pretty hard, man, pretty rough. There's all sorts of
skimming and I think the real thing is
stuff, organized crime, man. I mean,
that's it.
The outlaw side. Yeah.
The outlaw side they're trying to get rid of, and to get rid of the outlaw side, you really got to get rid of the cash, but you really can't get rid of the product. I mean, it's gonna be like, dealing in gold to a certain, or liquor. I mean, how often? Actually, it's a lot easier to walk off with a lot more in weed per dollar amount than it is in liquor. A couple of pounds of weed's worth thousands of dollars. A couple of pounds of liquor could be like $240s.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And cash only, let's forget.
And cash only, but the Safe Banking Act, 50-50 chance of passing. I mean, that was what Marijuana Moments reporting. So the whispers on Capitol Hill is, now we're all going outside again, and we're going to go get ourselves Corona 2. This time, it's the summer version. And so if that happens, and then we still have a cataclysmic recession that happens, the House has already passed it as with their part of the stimulus bill, the next round. So now if the Senate passes their round of the stimulus bill, Safe Banking Act.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, this is the 5th time I've seen this come through. So
oh yeah.
It's, I mean, it's probably better, more likely now because, essentially they'll, any allies we have in the, or any people who are interested in making legal cannabis more accessible and safe from those states, they're going to want to, they're going to want to get that in. They're going to put it in as a rider or whatever. They're going to attach it to the must-pass bill that's going to be the Corona relief. I mean,
or that's what they did with the hemp bill back in 2018. So eventually it was, I'm going to shut down the government. I'm Donald Trump. Farm bill, omnibus farm bill, spending package. Ding, and all of a sudden, hemp is no longer marijuana. So I could see that, but then I could see that just being like, okay, now all the banks are okay. Everybody rushes in, and then it just freezes at the federal level for 5 years. No new changes.
Like funds, just too much, or just
no, just because the states have traditionally held the police power to arrest people, and so if it's now going to be taken out of this Controlled Substances Act, it means that then there's going to be these defenses hey, you're not allowed to arrest me anymore. This is federally legal. So I think that could create an issue, and then that issue would be rectified, of course, by more states legalizing it. But Illinois, I think, was just number 10 or 11, the first one legislatively. So you have a lot more states that need to not just decriminalize, but make sure that you're not really arrested for it. Legalize it, at least like they did in Illinois and Washington State, where there's possession limits, but it's legal.
What's crazy here is before the state legalized it, there was not so much state interference. I mean, there was some, but not so much, more federal. Chris, when you were during medical days, did you have to deal with state authorities fucking with you, or was it always federal?
Well, I didn't have to deal. Luckily enough, I ran a shop. I didn't have to deal with any of them. What I had to do was, I did a lot of politicking, right? So I kind of started off with my local, so I was building out the shop, and this gal from the neighborhood walked in the back door while I was talking to the security guys. She's like, "Hey, you should come to this thing." And so I went to it was the Community Development Association, and I basically had to explain myself in front of a bunch of people. It was the first entry to it, and then I had to do a lot of just lobbying, and to get to know all the players, man. So I White Center, that is the jurisdiction is King County. So I had to get to know the King County sheriffs, and then like Dan Satterberg, who's the prosecutor here, county prosecutor, and also like Dow Constantine, and then like I think who was it, Jim? Oh hell, I can't remember his name, but the local council guy, for King County.
I know a lot of people. Oh, go ahead, man.
And just knowing the sheriffs, it's like one day we had our burglar alarm tripped accidentally while we were open, and the sheriffs came kicking in the door, but it's like I knew the guy because he was on the beat. The guy BJ, probably the best peace officer I ever met in my life, and he just came in to make sure we weren't getting robbed, and it was really cool. No big deal,
It's really cool.
Yeah, it was super cool, man. Super cool.
Yeah, I mean, I do stress with the guys even here because we have state approval as opposed to municipal. But I always say like all cannabis is local, and you just explain like those lessons of what did you do? You did a lot of politicking. You reached out into the community, and then you've networked and made relationships with the people that actually operate the community. So law enforcement, the elected representatives, those types of people in it, and that's really, really important so that they know that you're okay, and because there's that not in my backyard type aspect. Oh, yeah. So did you run into like a lot of not in my backyard, or marijuana's the devil's lettuce prejudice?
Not in White Center. White Center is like the happiest place on earth, but I did win a license in Mount Vernon, which is a small town where Glenn Beck is from, up in oh
my gosh, so it's Glenn Beck's people, the dispensary in Glenn Beck's hometown.
And they and so like they had allowed for a very small area to get to to open the shop in, and at the time I couldn't find anything, man. There was nothing really available, especially in my price range, So I ended up having to get the license issued in a place that was not conforming. Like the state gave me the license because it had the buffers via the state law, but the city wouldn't give me a business license because it didn't have buffers that accorded to their local ordinance, right? Mm-hmm. So I ended up having that in that space, trying to find another spot to move it for several years before I just had to let it go because there's nothing I can do with it.
Yeah.
So
local aspects and also the prejudice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, because I know in Thurston County during medical times, there's a lot of people getting fucked with the state local police. And then with, because you're in White Center, and for most people that don't know, some people consider White Center the bad area, but it's not. Like when these dispensaries were put there, I think it had helped improve the economy and whatnot when they were there. What do you think, Chris?
Well, like the medical shops?
Yeah, like during that time frame, because White Center had a bad rep, and then they're like, "We're going to throw all the weed stores into the bad neighborhoods," and it didn't really work.
It wasn't even. I mean, there was that was not by ordinance. That was simply by White Center has a lot of. White Center is very it's like a first landing community, right? So for the past like 70 years, every immigrant group that's come here has like landed there first, and then they move out as soon as they make some money. And so a lot of the landlords there are like Vietnamese dudes, and it was really about that. It was really about the fact that those guys didn't really care. They were like, "Oh, you pay the rent," and they owned all the buildings down there. So like that's what happened. I had like the coolest landlord, this guy Tan Chung, man, like just his grandfather was like feng shui master, and he was just like, he like brought me live trees in, was totally cool with it. I told him, anyway.
I think live trees though kind of goes with a cannabis dispensary.
But he'd grown it in his garden and like brought it in. I mean, that's why I ended up with after my first year in business there were 10 stores within 3 blocks. Of me. One of them was a farmer's market that had 30 some odd vendors, maybe 40 vendors who all represented either their own garden or like some of them were like, this Oregon stuff I brought up, that kind of stuff,
So the Oregonians that are selling at these farmers markets are interstate transferring with their cannabis. But I think that's fascinating that you said farmers markets, but you kind of described it as if it was, a shop in a building. So they would just set up a farmers market in a building, and then by farmers market, it's a dispensary where people would be able to bring in their cannabis and sell it.
I would think of it more as like Pike Place Market. It's like a big open market.
Yeah.
You got all the flower vendors and the fish vendors and whatever else. It was like that because it was all inside, but
booths all around.
Then some of the booths, because you go to Pike's and it would just be like, here's the weed booth.
Yeah. Oh
That's
yeah, and
awesome.
this was all weed booths, and you had like there was this awesome gal Michelle. Who went by the Orgasm Fairy, and she made all this like medicated lube and stuff like that. Like, oh man,
Hilarious.
Well, that was all early, yeah.
And then there's like cool, this cool lesbian couple. I remember they made this bomb ass medicated chili. You know, we had a big old nug fight in there one day. Like it was like really.
That's
early
when you
on.
know you have enough weed.
Yeah,
Guys,
yeah.
I'm up against my grow limits. Nug fight.
Yeah, dude, that's what it was. This guy Jensen from Freedom. He worked for them. He was their main grower like 10 years ago when they were doing that.
Well, I mean, you're pulling down 100 pounds a month.
Yeah, man. We just had it all. You know, it was like nobody was coming in that day. We just, man, it was this huge fury. It was hilarious. There's so much weed on the ground. It was stupid. It was really stupid, but it was fun. You know?
And that was quality weed probably at the time too, which I'm trying to tell Tom, like it was like pure capitalism at that time, as far as you know, if your product was good, you would pull in a bunch of dough, and then you probably had extra product to go promote yourself, because there was so many times I got free dabs, free joints, free this and that, just because, right? And then
lost leaders, I hear, are coming to Illinois, because that's some stuff that I saw from some of the plans that came out of Washington State. I'd be like, what do you mean you're going to have a $25 eighth?
Yeah,
what the hell is that?
That's why I joke about the cost of broccoli. You know, one day cannabis will be there where we're not freaking, you know, fighting over some bullshit. It's a plant that everybody has a chance to grow. It's a fucking hard plant to grow sometimes if you want quality and all that shit.
Yeah. Anybody can grow pot.
Anybody can grow shitty weed.
Yeah.
You know, but that's like literally why I'm not scared about these home grows, because the home grows, they aren't gonna. It's like, you know, yeah. I after work, I'm on a softball league. I'm not there sitting there thinking that I'm capable of being a pro baseball player. You know, there's a difference between high quality flower produced under ideal circumstances and what you grew in your basement.
Yeah. Home brews aren't putting Budweiser out of business.
No, but some breweries, they might be able to make a business. And so I kind of like the bridge from they're very often called like the craft grower license or the micro grower license. It's a reasonable accumulation of wealth, but you still need like $4 million to $6 million. Yeah. Okay. Let's now see if we can crunch that $4 to $6 million down. So can we start creating really secure light depth greenhouses to get, you know, the price point of the pound of flower down?
It's a $200,000, like really. I mean, you know, I could see $500,000, but it's like a $200,000 investment, and then it's, you know, $3.8 million in fucking regulation costs. That's really what it is, you know. Because it's like, you got to get the building, you got to pull the permits, you got to get the power pulled right, you got to do this, you got to do that. That's what's killing all those NorCal growers, man. You know, like those guys had, you know, buckets of money buried in the dirt, you know, and they've been just going through it, trying to like reach.
When does it end? When does it end? When's our burn end?
Yeah, it doesn't, you know, and like none of them, like they all had plenty when they started, you know. But now 2.5, 3 years into it, those poor fuckers are going out, man.
Well, what's the premium price for a pound of high quality indoor over where you guys are at?
Well, it depends on where you're going. I think, you know, between like 16 and 22, I think is the top right now, although it's going up. Because
that's good. Or is that the my cousin brother market?
No, that's the 502 market, because like we don't have the 502. We have the CRTA market in Illinois, and that's 3,500 to 4,000 a pound.
Yeah, that's a ripoff.
Well, I was gonna say,
yeah.
But
It's going to go down. It's going to take time, like as supply comes online. But
I mean,
if you can grow bomb flower like at a higher quality and a better flavor profile than the stuff you're going to be able to buy from one of our large producers like Cresco, those people that win those craft grow license are just going to sell capacity. Absolutely. For the first few years.
Now I've seen that in every state so far. If you got people who can really produce quality product and be able to do the marketing associated with it, right, like you're sold out no matter what, you know, like, but then you've got like a lot of people who just grow bud, you know, or people who hire their electrician as their master grower, you know, like stuff just goes wrong, man. And then like you just end up with stuff that like, okay, you might as well oil it up, and then you're just a bulk producer, which you can make money at too, but there, you know, it's all volume at that point.
Yeah.
So what do you see the best quality from? Is it still HPS indoor grown? HPS flowering lights? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat them for how dense the nugs get.
The nugs get so effing dense, just so effing dense.
It's just so expensive, man. It's like in Cali,
and it rips up your electricals as well. So you have to like try to cycle on lights. But then, was there any type of like hybridization? I mean, can we get like LEDs with HPSs? I'm sorry, it's a nug shot, so I might as well. Sure, that's some. I believe that's cereal milk. It's good stuff.
Man, I just smoked all the good shit. I've been just like, tearing through the quarantine, man.
Well, I'm really interested to see like, okay, the HPSs I've still heard like the best, and like the brands that I know here in Illinois that have like the best bag appeal and the best nose on them, they're HPS grown indoor. But I'm really interested in seeing the full spectrum, like complete grade of the LEDs and see what they can do, like stacking up to an HPS. Because in Illinois, we have like, power requirements. And then I guess with solar coming through, but the HPS, when they click on, I hear they take like a huge draw from the grid.
Yeah, they really do. I mean, it just comes down to like, it comes down to a bunch of stuff. Like for me, it's, it's really like, well, what are you trying to grow? Like how much of it, if you're doing one of those craft grows, I would say it pays to do the HPS, right? But if you've got a 30,000 plus square foot warehouse and you're trying to do just a lot of blow and go bud, man, I mean, you might as well just get some really high quality LEDs. There are some that produce, I rarely see them as dense. I mean, they just don't get as dense, and that's the biggest split, and then past that.
Yeah, I mean, I just pulled some off my. Of course, this is like I play Little League. I'm going to talk about the pros now. No, it's not. But I just pulled down a plant, and that I was growing from a Chinese purported 300-watt full spectrum LED, and I'm like, that's some larfy crap. But it's fine. It smells all right. Yeah. It's nowhere near as dense as the buds there. I mean, like I got some Oregon outdoor grown in the CBD variety, and those are some pretty dense buds when you're growing outdoors. But so do you see any benefits from the price point of light depth greenhouses?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all day long, it's that's where you get your if you get a really good run on that, that's where you get your $25 eighths from all day long, and I mean, like those are $25 eighths people aren't sad to get. They look at it and they're like, all right, well, it's dense enough and tastes real good. It's got a good nose. It might be a little dark. That's what you end up with. It's a little darker than normal. But or than like doing an indoor for the HPS, but and then that affects your bag appeal. But 80% of the people who are going to buy it, that's what they're looking for. They just want something cheap that I'm not.
We don't have bag appeal in Illinois though.
Yeah, because you can't see it.
You can't. It's like grandma's medicine, and you're not even allowed to touch it. Like there's like restrictions where it's like you want this one, don't touch it. And then you get in a brown paper bag. It's like the soup Nazi. Remember that in Seinfeld?
Yeah,
right. Okay. Buying weed in Illinois is like going to the soup Nazi and buying weed. The soup Nazi's the dispensary, but then they're really friendly about it. So they're trying to have great customer service while still complying with the state law. That kind of sucks. But yeah, I hope one day we are allowed to have smell jars and bag appeal where we can like see the bud as opposed to see the bud or a picture of a bud, because like that grower can take a wonderful, sexy Instagram shot, but that's not necessarily what the bud always looks like,
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, then that just comes down to, the operations of the business themselves. They need to be doing their own quality control. If in Illinois you can't ever look at it until you get it home, that just means that like that Instagram shot has to match what you've got in that jar, or you put it.
Oh, it never does.
Have it be something.
It doesn't. It absolutely.
Well, obviously not. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, most of those companies are really just trying to like get some cash flow, and they like whatever they grow that's like halfway decent that passes testing, they need to push it out, and like they just need the money flowing through because all of them are leveraged like crazy, and they're
all raising money.
They're all raising money, and it's so stupid. Like, oh man, just the
American capitalism is essentially like an elephant going down on a luge. If you're just trying to drive the most, like just an edge, and where anything can go wrong, it's going to be terrible. And so, like every time we see ourselves like melt down in any particular recession, you just kind of like go and you go like, "Wow, America, you really are always just skating right there from like everything's totally fine and everybody's really rich to completely in the ditch and we're all fucked." And it's just sad. I mean, like nobody has healthcare, nobody has jobs anymore. Everybody's getting paid from the government. And then why? So that we can see how well we can leverage up these companies to cook their books and increase their stock price so that, progress.
Hey, Cody, because we always talk about prices and what it costs to get in business. And, Tom's got the Illinois perspective. Since you've actually been here and done it, if I was to jump into the Washington market as a store, what should I, how much should I go in with? What do you think?
There's a lot of factors, right? I mean, where are you trying to get it? You can't just get a license anymore, so you got to buy somebody's shop out. Yeah. You got to do like research and figure out where it can be, what you can do with it. There's a difference between like the original licenses given out in the lottery and also between those and then the ones that they gave out later, the 5052 licenses, in terms of where you can move them and what they can do. And all those things would like totally influence like how much money you need. I mean, if you want to buy so shops here in Seattle, like that weren't doing well, that were just like basically open and they made enough money to, pay some taxes, like those sold for like $1 million just the license basically.
Oh, wow. Shit. Because like we were talking before,
but I mean, okay, man. But then there's like shops outside of town that you can still do really well with, like
border towns.
Yeah. Well, like Benton County, right? Benton County didn't allow any in the initial lottery, but then in 5052, there was some folks out there that were running like a medical dispensary, and they went through the LCB licensing and they got one. And then because they were the only one for the whole county and it was close to the border, they were clearing like $1.1 million a month, for a while. And then I know another guy who went through the rigmarole to get another license and actually move it out there too, so he could split that market with them. Oh. Because so it's really close to these, they're called the Tri-Cities, Kennewick, Richland, and I forget the last one off the top of my head. But anyway, those three towns have moratoria, so you can't open one in them. So this one shop outside of town was it for 150,000 people plus the border folks. And now this other guy I know, he like got one out there. I think that cost him $2.5 million, that whole process, just to get it in there. You go.
Man. So that's what everybody asks. Like, I want to do this. How much is it? Well, that depends on a lot of things. But it's probably more than you're willing to pay.
Yeah. And I mean, you're going to be looking at years before you really get paid back,
and then they're going to dilute your licenses sometimes because depending on how they do it, here in Illinois, it's at the state level. Over in Washington, well, you said there's a moratorium on any new one, so you have to buy one. That's different than like in California or in some other states where the municipality can just allocate however many they want in particular.
Yeah, and that's a huge pain in the ass. Like I've done a lot of work in California. I've been on multiple application license deals down there, got a few, lost a few, and it's just a pain in the ass because like every town's different and it's very much like a good old boy system because, some of those towns, like, they're most of the coastal towns in California are affluent, especially south of San Francisco, from like there south, like if you're like within 50 miles, 100 miles of the coast, like the city's has a very wealthy elite. And then like some other, like, a lot of other people who have decent wealth. And so like, if you're trying to do business in any of those towns, like you really need to know somebody because like they'll know, they'll know the city council people. And then like, it's just how it is, and some towns have gotten in trouble for it. Adelanto had like a big thing. The mayor got in trouble by, I think it was the feds even, because it was a corruption charge, because he was basically selling licenses to people who were applications. So you end up with that when you like turn it over to local authorities. It's like, you can almost like there's a correlation between this and like the COVID response, right? Like there's, the states are allowed to do whatever they want. So like they're operating under 50 different plans where it could just be one plan from the top, but it's not because that's how the law is written or that's how that's being governed, That's the thing. In California, you've got like the state, which doesn't want to take a strong stand because they have a lot of cantankerous towns that are very affluent.
See, this is why I think that after we get the Safe Banking Act on the federal level, it might just kind of do nothing for 5 years because you're talking about all these types of influences and postures and policies of some people who just don't like it in their backyard, other people who are trying to get in for their good old boys and make sure that they can make their money as well. And if if it's legal to bank, this excited. I don't think Texas is ready to go yet. No way. I don't think a lot of states are ready to go yet. But then as that kind of chips away and it opens up more and more, then I think, you'll see more of a, well, where are you going to put it? And are they going to totally just take it out of the controlled substance? They should totally deschedule it. But then you have a vacuum. You see, that's even different than hemp, because with hemp, we have like a federal regulation, and then so the USDA regulations next year for hemp are going to go into effect, and it's going to fuck with the hemp industry because of the CBD levels, and it's going to change the genetics that are being planted there. So they didn't just legalize hemp; they changed it from one legislation to another legislation. So are they going to do that as well then? So, these are harder questions than just what I want is just a pure, descheduling, but that creates a vacuum, and they didn't even do the vacuum for hemp. So I'm suspect that once it's legal to bank, then you're going to see the industry just start really, really growing until they figure out a way to move it out of the Schedule 1 and allow it to still be, somewhat regulated at the federal level.
I think it's always, you guys are always gonna be able to get fucked with no matter what process, the legalization. Like Cody, when you were doing medical, I mean, you did the right things by knowing your local community, but how about with the DEA? I mean, I remember in 2011, there was a string of raids, and back then the cannabis community was more tight knit because everybody can go to jail, right? I remember one chick posted when they started doing raids in Tacoma and all the shops started closing up. Do you remember that day?
Yeah, no, that was the same batch where I just said. Remember earlier, it's like that guy was half block away from me and got raided.
Oh, yeah.
So that was part of those 23 shops where they did it then. Yeah, that was That was nice to have the community, because it's like you started hitting people up and like, so what's going on, and then like, somebody, I think it was, John Davis. You ever had him on here? I don't know.
No, I know he is.
Yeah, but anyway, he would talk to like somebody at the DA's office, and then like somebody else would hear something from somewhere else, and we'd try to like put together what was really happening and like what they were going after. And then like there were the raids, and then there were also like the letters that went out. So instead of raiding, they're like, we'll send you a letter, and we're going to tell you that we'll raid you if you don't close at this location. And we always try to figure out like, well, why are they picking those locations, like those shops? Because there's so many, they're like, oh, they're only going to do 28. And they're going to pick 11 like a few weeks later,
And those letters too, they were also attacking businesses through the landlords. I know a couple places they're like, we're pulling out because the landlord got a letter threat, and it's like, but there was no problems in between or before,
Yeah, and you could just never really figure out like what it was. I mean, sometimes it was like, oh, okay, well, these are maybe mostly bad actors that they've had like complaints about, and it did seem to be more complaint driven, oh, there's too much.
But that just then means that, we were living in a world where you can call a random tip, calls the authorities, and then the DEA shows up. So when did the DEA stop raiding in Washington State?
Well, it was the Rohrabacher thing. So remember the other
Rohrabacher,
thing.
So 2015-ish.
Yeah. So that was the writer. That was a writer that he threw on the budget bill that year.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so that went through, and suddenly the DEA was defunded from conducting raids.
For medical, though, but they weren't defunded from conducting, and they still aren't. I think even in this year's budget, the Democrats have like changed it, and they've dropped the word medical. Then they just left it at marijuana, a state's marijuana law. But then I thought the Republicans this time nixed it, and then so it just went back to the original Rohrabacher amendment language in whatever particular section of the budget was this year. But then have the DEA been raiding any 502, any rec shops that you know of?
Not the DEA, I mean, I think for the most part, unless it's like super diversion. I'm trying to think like. It kind of took up my memory, but I can't remember anything specific, so I won't say that it's happened. But like, as far as they haven't. The DEA hasn't raided anybody. It's been either the LCB or state cops.
Yeah, the only DEA raids that I've really heard from has to do with illegal home grows in states after they legalize it. So people will like buy houses and just grow the crap out of them in a particular. Right. Well, I mean that could happen now in Illinois because they've. The 5 plants is a $200 fine. It's just a fine, So if you don't have your medical card and you're growing 5 plants, bad person. But if you do have your medical card and you're growing 5 plants, that's fine. And so that's kind of similar to what they did in Colorado. And so then Colorado in 2019 had its biggest DEA raid, but it was just a string of probably even out of state or out of the country business people that bought a whole bunch of houses and then grew a whole bunch of cannabis and then exported it outside of Colorado because they're like, it's got a name brand, kind of like how California has a name brand because they know that it's legal there. So it's going to be better. I mean, kind of Canada had a name brand when I was in college,
Yeah. I remembered something. This happened, I think it was last year. So this was not in the 502 system, but it was Cannabis Grow. But it wasn't the DEA that raided it, right? These Chinese dudes, and they had like a really big grow. They had I think it was 50 or 60 employees that were all Chinese nationals. And so it was immigration that came and busted them and arrested everybody and then just deported them all back to China. So, but they had a bunch of big warehouses going, but the DEA didn't even do that. So I don't know if that means anything or not.
Well, and I don't think we've had an issue with them since 2011. Matter of fact, those are the raids that Lance are still serving time for, our friend Lance Glore. And to kind of circle back into the medical time frame, even though I talked about the cannabis community and how kind of tight we were, there's a lot of dickheads too, man. I mean, there's people when he got arrested were just like, "Hey, we're done," even though it was just a total pot case. They're like, not even trying to stand up and support him, which I think is the biggest failing when it comes to cannabism or cannabis.
Cannabism.
Well, sometimes it's an eat dog world, because if we all don't support each other over one,
that's just when you come across these dog eat dog types, and they're everywhere. You have to understand that they're just stupid, and they don't understand that they're the dog as well. And so that when they act in those types of self-dealing, manipulative ways, it can work out fairly well for them. I would argue that it's worked out fairly well for the man in the Oval Office, but it usually doesn't, because you're being a schmuck. You're being a jerk, and you're trying to manipulate somebody because it's one of those things where I got it, you want it, and I'm not letting it go for bleeping nothing. It's that manipulation of it, as opposed to what business is supposed to be, the creation of value, as opposed to the exploitation of a supply. I'm not the biggest fan of OPEC or the Chinese Communist Party. When they're controlling the supply like that, that's terrible. But then I do like Apple computers because they're creating products that you didn't even know you needed. That's the creation of value.
Mm-hmm. Well, here, Cody, did you ever see growers calling on growers and shopkeepers calling on shopkeepers? There always seemed to be I'm gonna call the police to get on you, even though it was just
there's some of that. I mean, there's definitely some of that. The real bad stuff was the stuff they didn't call the cops about. That's what got real sketchy. That's the kind of stuff you don't miss. I don't miss it all. Legalization.
So when you say you don't miss that stuff, does that mean you're probably never going to try to own yourself a cannabis license again?
Well, I do have at least one going, but yeah, man. I mean, I don't know. It's I don't know. I liked the way it was in medical. There's a lot of light warriors. A lot of people I knew anyway. Real cool, man. Real true believers and people who really were trying to help. And then there are also plenty of freaking sociopaths and crazy assholes who just ruin it all.
America, man.
Yeah, man, it's America. It's America. It's you got a lot of real cool people and then a bunch of fucking crazy assholes who just fucking ruin it for everybody. And when you talk about that, not backing people up sometimes, it's well, a lot of it's personal, man. It's do you know that guy? You don't know that guy. That guy's a fucking crazy asshole.
For real.
But that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. That's why we can't have nice things, though.
That's true.
But
we do have pretty nice things. And
there's a lot better than one.
Yeah. But anyway, so if you have some parting wisdoms to the people that watch the show all the way to now that are thinking I really got to get into this industry. This is the best. They're in an emerging market, so they haven't seen the years, and they're basically going to be jumping into 502 land. The days of grow and give are long gone. So, what type of recommendations would you give to those true believing entrepreneurs?
Well, pick your partners very carefully. That's a big one. Whoever you're going to do business with, you better know them real well. Also, like, be careful where you take money from. You know, that can fuck you just as well as anything. What else? Be on time with your filings.
Always comply with the statutory requirements.
Yeah, comply with statutory, that kind of stuff.
No.
Yeah.
Chris, Cody, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can we find or follow what you got going on?
What do I got? I got a website that I don't have up right now, so I can't really tell you that. I've got a Facebook page that I don't put a whole lot on anyway. Most of my stuff is more personal, people I know, like things I'm into. I get referrals from folks all the time to be on applications, so I do that kind of thing. Because I'm obviously experienced in retail, and just supply chain, all sorts of stuff. So, I don't know. You can always email me, Cody@highlyfunctioning.com. That's a good place. Find me on LinkedIn, that kind of stuff.
For sure. We'll throw those links in the description. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe to keep up with all cannabis legalization news. We'll see you on Wednesday for a discussion with a lawyer from Arizona about the cannabis laws they have going on. So make sure you like and subscribe. Later.